All right. Good afternoon. Today's a special day as it marks the very first meeting, as far as I know, in our brand new branch for Summit City Branch 116. So it's an exciting day. The future looks bright for our branch, although we face many challenges I know we're going to be up to them. Carl Sagan once said, "You have to know the past to understand the present." So today we are here to explore the past. It's an honor to have with me here 6 of our past and present leaders from the branch. And if you're like me, a lot of times you take for granted what we have as letter carriers. So today, hopefully, we're going to learn a lot more about our history, as we just discussed, a lot of the stories from the past, but also we'll be inspired and challenged by those who came before us. So to start off, I'd like to start down here and just state your name, the years that you served, and some of your positions.
Okay. My name is Robert Gardner. I started in June of 1969. I was 18 years old and had just graduated from high school in May. Shortly after I came to the Postal Service, I got a draft notice, and I actually did enlist in the Air Force in June of 1970. So I had 1 year of carrying experience before I went into the Air Force. And then when I was released from the Air Force 4 years later, I came back to the Postal Service. I carried mail in the 03s. That was my first bid assignment, and I held that route for 8 years. And then different positions that I've held in the union. I've been the secretary of the branch. I've been vice president. I've been a trustee, the data entry for the branch. Never been a steward. Never been the president. But I have been a state officer in the state association, and I currently hold a position at Step B, which is the third step of the grievance procedure for the letter carriers, and I do the letter carrier grievances for the state of Indiana and the state of Kentucky. I was also an EI facilitator from 1991 to 1994, thanks to my president at the time, Alan Lauer. I have 41 years plus in the post office, and I'm still working. I have not retired.
Harold Lloyd, retired January 31st, 1986. I've held quite a few offices in the branch, starting with Sergeant at Arms, trustee, vice president, treasurer, president, vice president, and also held several state offices. I was elected to the executive board, chairman of the executive board, treasurer, and then was vice president. Got defeated for president by 8 votes. And I also was active in what was called the district. We had, at one time, we had district offices. There was 5 districts. We were the Northeast. I was a secretary, vice president, and then I was also delegate to the AFL-CIO Central Labor Council. In the mid-70s, the Central Labor Council went kung fu. They didn't know what they were doing. So they started a group because the centennial was coming. They wanted labor to participate in it. So they started a group, Northeast, United Labor of Northeastern Indiana. And it was quite interesting. We ended up, I was an officer in that group too. It was quite interesting. I had a lot of offices, a lot of work. I was vice president of the branch. And although it was illegal, the president and I, on several occasions, would stop and have coffee at Azar's on Bluffton Road. Discuss what was, because we were both working out of Waynedale Station, we could discuss what was going on with the branch. Other than that, I don't know.
Didn't do anything else wrong, right?
Pardon me?
Didn't do anything else illegal, right?
No.
Okay.
In the mid-60s,
When did you start?
the post
When did you
office,
start in? What year?
I started May 1st, 1952, carried mail for 6 years in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then transferred down here in June of 1958. In mid-60s, I want to comment on this. The post office decided they were going to do away with partial post delivery. We went to one-day delivery. Saturdays were the business routes, and the routes in the stations, they eliminated another day during the week. Well, in turn, we lost all the partial post business in that. We didn't get it back until United Partial went on strike a couple of years ago. Now, we have proved that we can do a better job than what they were planning on.
Yeah. Great.
And on the strike, well, we voted to back off, hold off.
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that. We'll go ahead and finish the introductions. We'll come back to this, right? Bob?
I'm Robert Lehman. I worked from April 1952 to October 1992. I was vice president between 1969 and about 1971 or 2. Outside the strike, nothing exciting happened.
I don't believe that. Thanks for being here, Bob. Johnny?
Yeah, my name is John Freistroffer, and I started my postal career in May of 1964. I joined the union in August of '64. So I retired in 2003 with my military and union service. I had 42 and a half years. And when I hired in 1964, my wages were $2.06 an hour. The substitute carriers were not given overtime, and since 1970 we've really improved vastly with the contract.
Thanks for being here. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Alan Lauer Sr., and I had the honor of being hired to the Postal Service on May 27th, 1967. My starting wage was $2.48. Coming from a manufacturing company, I took a 4-cent an hour cut to work at the post office. And the same day I came to the post office, I could have had the opportunity to go to International Harvester. So, and I retired on January 2nd, 1998. Had a little over 40 years of total federal service, including my military time. And some of the interesting things I feel has happened that most of you don't remember the Milsters probably, the three-wheel vehicles. Had a lawnmower engine, you sat right on top of it, and it was very cool in the summer. And I know I was delivering out northeast because Hazelwood Station at that time, Station A, had a lot of Milsters. And there was a lady on Vance Avenue, she called in on me because I left a black mark from my tire in her driveway. And of course, that was the purpose of Milster, so you could get close to the mail receptacle. Most of them had mail slots in the garage door. And so she called in on me. And then another interesting thing was a lady, we had about 4 inches of ice and snow on the ground. I was living out in North Crest subdivision, and the best way to get any traction was to walk across the lawns. This one customer come out the door and says, "Sir, come back here." So I walked back, and she said, "You have just torn our lawn up. We spent $800 fixing this nice lawn, and you're just tearing it up." says, "I never want you to cross my lawn again." I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I continued on. And I guess I really had an unusual and distinct pleasure of being the local president whenever the national turned 100 years old. I was the local president when the local turned 100 years old. And I was also the state president whenever they had turned 100 years old. So I don't know how many people could have accomplished that, and I didn't set out to accomplish that, but I feel honored that I had the privilege of serving in those capacities, and I served basically as a steward, I served as a trustee, and as local president in the local level, and on the state level I was a member of the executive board. I also was the state president for 6 years, and a few years after that I served a few years as director of retirees. And so I really feel very fortunate that I was able to do the things that I was able to do, and I want to thank all the good subordinate officers that I had during my time of service. And one thing I think is rather unique during my time as state president was the fact that I appointed the first 2 women of director of education. And the last one that I appointed was immediately to my right, to my left, Rebecca Riley. And as far as I remember, she never did have a challenge while she served in that office. So I evidently must have made a good choice. And so I really appreciate Becky's efforts and everything that she's done throughout the years. And I'm very proud to have served with her.
Oh, now you're going to make me cry, Al. I'm Becky Riley. I'm the current president of Branch 116. I started carrying mail in '85. I've always been a union member, but it took me about 10 years to get real active. I started out as a steward, thanks to Al. He's the one that got me started in everything that I've done. Started out as a steward, went on to be vice president, was director of education for I don't know how many years, 8 maybe, on the state level. I'm on my 2nd term, 3rd year as president, and loving it. A lot of hard work, but I love it.
Our first female branch president.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Well, I just want to get us started. I found this quote from the Carriers in the Common Cause, NALC Historic History book, and I thought it would be good to get us going here. And it says, in 1955, the Postal Record reported that the average American family earned about $5,500 a year before taxes. The average letter carrier earned about $4,400 a year, $1,100 a year less. At the same time, U.S. News and World Report reported that while the wages of workers in private industry had increased between $20 and $36 a week in the last 5 years, letter carriers' wages had increased by a mere $5.50. Many carriers were struggling just to remain above the poverty line. Their wages were so low that in some states, carriers were eligible to receive food stamps, Medicaid, and other assistance designed for the poor. Ironically, Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty was helping some letter carrier families to survive. Breakdowns in service, deteriorating working conditions, and poverty-level wages took their toll. Morale fell so low that many carriers were leaving the service for better jobs in private industry. By 1967, the employee turnover rate in the service was approximately 26% a year, and it was difficult to find people willing to work as carriers. So we know from before the strike in 1970, wages were not very good. Anybody like to share what you were making? I know Al mentioned.
I remember that when I started in 1969, I made $3.06 an hour. And Johnny, you started how many years before me?
1964.
64, 5 years before me. So the wages had gone up you started, was it 264?
206.
206, and I was making 306, so it went up $1 in 5 years an hour. And again, you got no overtime. In fact, if you worked 8 hours and 29 minutes, you got paid for 8 hours. If you worked 8 hours and 31 minutes, you got paid for 9 hours. The managers were well aware of this and made sure that you worked 8:29 and not 8:31. So they always were getting that half hour of work for free. And then after the strike, they changed how the overtime was paid, and it was paid by the 100th of an hour. That if you worked 100th of an hour or 800ths of an hour overtime, you got paid for the 800ths, and then 900ths. If you worked at 700ths, you didn't get paid. So there was a line where you didn't get paid, but 800ths is 5 minutes. So if you worked more than 5 minutes of overtime in a day, you got paid for it. And because of the union, I received a large check that they filed a nationwide grievance for all the letter carriers that were working those 29-minute without being paid every day. The union filed a national level grievance, and we all received a check. And it was almost like $600, and that was back when you're making $3 an hour. That was a lot of money, and that for all the days that he had worked that 29 minutes and never got paid for it, we received that check from due to the national filing a grievance on that. And then also that I hired in 69. In 1970, I went into the military, and that was right when the strike was happening. And I remember receiving a check while I was in basic training for back pay that they had settled, and they were giving us back pay, and I received a check, and I was the only one in basic training that had any money because I received that check while I was in basic.
Took everybody out.
Yeah, right. Confined to the barracks.
Now, how much was Al and Bob making? You both started in 1952, right?
I started in 52, and I got $1.61.5 an hour, and there was no overtime. And the supervisor, he checked your time card. If you didn't have 120 hours, he wouldn't know where he was goofing off at.
120 hours for the week?
For the 2 weeks.
For the 2 weeks?
I had worked as high as 175 hours. We got paid on the 1st and the 15th. And the 16th and the third last day of the month. And at that time, when you got paid, you may be a week behind when you got your check. Because if it fell on a Sunday or Saturday, well, then they didn't work. And they didn't take and figure out their time card until about Wednesday or Thursday when you got your pay. It was kind of interesting.
And remember, back then, the only way you could get a pay increase was through Congress. And it was at their mercy. And of course, they were not going to give their employees a break.
In a 2-week period, I worked as high as 175 hours.
Wow.
With no overtime?
No overtime.
So was this straight pay?
Straight pay?
Straight pay.
Wow.
That was $1.61.5 an hour.
Was there a lot of turnover back then?
Now, the job was froze. There was no hiring because it was right after World War II, and you couldn't beg, borrow, or steal a job. And if you got a job in the post office, you kept it, even though it didn't pay. And all the time I worked in the post office, I worked part-time.
Another part-time job.
That was, oh, you mean you had another part-time job?
Yes.
I had another part-time job.
But in working 170 hours for 2 weeks, you still...
Well, in that time, all the time I was subbing, I didn't have time because I never know what we were going to do. You would start at 5 o'clock in the morning, go in, and if you didn't have an assignment, you'd go sit in the swing room. And then if they got an assignment for you, we'd go out and go to work.
But you weren't getting paid in the swing room.
You didn't get any guaranteed pay at all. You sat in the swing room until they took the dog. And then when you got done with your route at night, well, I was carrying in Milwaukee, and we'd get on a bus and ride downtown and run a collection till 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Oh, my gosh.
And there was nothing uncommon have to take and run special deliveries on your days off. You didn't have a day off. You just you didn't have any free time. They just kind of ruled you with an iron hand.
So that was when you were a sub.
Yes.
So you would go in without any idea what your schedule would be, and if they didn't need you, you just had to wait.
You just
So
sit in a swing room. And there's many mornings when I transferred to Fort Wayne here, we'd go sit in the swing room, and all of a sudden, the supervisor would come and say, "Okay, go do some clerk work." And you go out and have to take and sort mail until an opening would come up. And after you do that for an hour, well, then you go back to the swing room and sit.
And we all recline.
You didn't have any guaranteed for anything. And even when I transferred here to Fort Wayne, I was still on the no overtime pay. And we ran collections till 10 o'clock at night. And then on Sunday, we'd have to run a collection. There wasn't anything good about it. And at first, when I started carrying here in Fort Wayne, we had to carry a pistol. And you would have to go to the clerk's room, head stamp room, check out a pistol, and you'd take and wear that all the time you were on collection.
wow.
And finally, I went to the supervisor one day and I said, "When's the last time that pistol was checked?" He said, "I don't think it's ever been checked." I said, "What good's it do to carry a pistol if we don't know it works?" Being in the Marine Corps, I'd had my share of weapons experience. And he looked at me and said, "Well, we'll see about it." Well, come to find out, they hadn't checked the weapons, hadn't fired them in over 2 years. So the Art Gag line, Dick Pratt says, "We eliminate carrying the pistol." So that was a plus there. Because, like I said, I didn't know if it was going to, I didn't want to take and grab a pistol and then take it out fire.
Or blow up on you or something, huh? Wow, I never knew
That's
that.
great. That's great.
It was kind of interesting. Like I said, you never knew what was going to happen.
What was it like dealing with management before 1970? How were grievances handled? Was there any grievances?
No
Do
grievances.
any good? Or,
You didn't have, there wasn't anything grievances until they went on strike.
Okay.
When they went on strike, the NLC had not been trained in grievance procedures. So we had to take and go to school and learn how to take and file grievances and work that way. It was an interesting time in our training. Because at that time, you went to a convention and nobody knew anything about your grievances. So you had to take and learn from scratch.
How did you handle disputes?
You didn't.
You didn't. There was no disputes. It was management's way or the highway, basically.
Right, right.
But if you wanted something where you didn't have any contractual rights, you had to do them a favor, or 2 favors, or 3 favors for them to, like if you needed to be off for something, well, then you owe me a couple of favors, or you're going to do me a couple of favors, and then I'll see about getting you off. So.
And one thing, though, probably everybody here, even counting Robbie, you were on probation for 1 whole year. You could be fired at any time. You could walk in one day and they say, "Out of here, you're gone." There's nothing you can do.
When I first started carrying, Art Belts is the one who trained me, and he had a business route downtown. And at the time, business deliveries were twice a day. He trained me in the morning. He cased the mail, showed me how to case the mail. We went out and delivered it, and came back and, after delivering the morning rounds, and he said, okay, you do the afternoon. So I cased up the mail that came in while we were on the street and went out and delivered the same businesses. Now, the residential area at that time was just one delivery, but previous to my time, and I don't know when it stopped, but Bob, it might have been when you had 2 residential deliveries and 3 business deliveries per day.
I think that was 1950.
Was it 1950 that stopped?
The residential.
But in 1969, when I started, they were still doing the 2 deliveries per day for the businesses.
Yes.
Who was president first, Al or Bob, or Jerry or Bob? Who was, Bob was president before Jerry was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, Bob, do you remember handling any disputes before the
Oh,
grievance
no.
procedure? No? You just kind of talked your way around things?
Well, see, you weren't allowed to have a union, so that's why it's called National Association of Letter Carriers. Maybe keep that.
in the early days, if you were a union member, you stood a chance of getting fired.
That's what I was just saying, that you had to keep it secret.
And actually, we didn't have hospitalization until the mid-60s. We had to pay, if you wanted any hospitalization for your family, you had to, and NEOC was one of the first to start a hospitalization plan. And they, I think it was 1952, they inaugurated a health benefits plan. And you just had to, you paid the bill yourself. You know, with no deduction or anything. So you had to mail a check in every once in a while. I forget, probably about once a month you'd mail a check in for your hospitalization.
So,
But our dues, but our dues for belonging to the union were the same. There was no deductions from our pay. The steward came around, or whoever collected the dues and had a card that you would check off that you paid your dues that month.
yeah, I believe we still got that file up there, don't we, Jerry?
I was a sub. I subbed 3 different times. And I worked out of the main office, and I got in the union as soon as I got here. Well, at one time, these people were paying, the branch would pay with their dues, but they never collected the money. It was 50 cents a month. So that was $6 a year. Well, they made a resolution that if they would take and pay 1 year's back pay, that would be 50 cents, every month, every payday, 50 cents, they would be reinstated in the branch. Well, so since I was in the main office, they assigned me the job to go around every payday. I'd collect 50 cents from everybody, and the guys that were delinquent, I'd collect 50 cents from them. So what you may have paid yours, that's all right. I paid, one time I paid 50 cents, and the next time each one of them had to pay 50 cents.
Could you do that on the clock?
Yeah, I did. And you think management didn't care. They didn't bother me.
Yeah.
They although it was checking and very strict, management kind of shut their eyes.
When you was talking before about doing something illegal by meeting for coffee and talking about things, is that what you meant, that you were not allowed? Talking about disputes and things like that?
If we'd have caught us, we'd have got canned
So
on the spot.
that's what you're talking about, the secret meetings.
I mean, even the officers in the early days, they had to take and hide their meetings, because if the management found out about it, they got dismissed.
So your regular union meetings?
No, you didn't.
They
They had a meeting that I can't say because that was before my time.
Bob, when were you elected president?
1970,
Oh, 1970, okay.
maybe 69, I don't know.
69.
Well, that kind of brings us up to 1970. And of course, most of us know on March 17th, 1970, New York City, Branch 36, NALC's largest branch, went on strike. This was, of course, illegal and against the National Union at the time. And this strike spread throughout the country. A lot of the bigger cities were participating in it. And you can read it in Carriers in the Common Cause has a really good record of it. But basically shut the country down for 8 days because everything was done by mail back in 1970. So when you shut down New York City, you're shutting down the country. Just want to talk locally about Branch 116. Days leading up to the strike, what was the atmosphere like? Was there support of it? And then was there a vote taken? Bob, I don't know.
Yeah.
You want to address that? What happened?
Well, anybody who worked at that time, when you came in, signed a paper that you would not strike. And we had a meeting, and of course we just left it hang flux because we waited to see what the nation was going to do. And I flew down there for a meeting. Well, nothing was really decided at the meeting. Of course, Rademacher wasn't exactly well. Of course, he'd have gone to jail too. But Fenstermacher and Pratt sent me a letter saying, pointing out I and maybe you would have been arrested if it was looked out. But I know quite a few people here said they weren't going to do it under normal conditions, so we just waited to see what the nation did. So most of the country did not walk out.
That's correct.
Fenstermacher was the postmaster at the time, wasn't he?
No.
Al Smith was supposed
Al
to.
Smith was.
Okay, and Fenstermacher, what position did he have?
Well,
He was assistant postmaster.
And he's the one that sent the
Dick
letter.
Pratt, I don't know what he did.
He
Killed
was,
the clerks or did
he was assistant postmaster in charge of the clerks. And
I don't know, maybe Al Smith signed that letter too. I should have saved it, but I didn't want to make it history.
and we had a special meeting at the Fruhoff Union Hall on across from Fruhoff Union, their plant. And at that meeting, they voted to take him to, they brought it up to have it go on strike. And they tabled it. And by the time I tabled, the next meeting came around where they'd settled the strike.
Okay.
But we had several strike calls. One, Barney Beckstead was president,
Yeah.
and Bill Grunwald was president, and I was vice president. And at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning, 2 FBI men beating on my front door. And they said, if you go on strike, you're going to jail.
Oh my God.
Well, we had anticipated, we didn't know what we were going to do, but we had taken all of our funds and put it in a secret checking account. And only 2 people knew where the money was at. And I wasn't one of them. But it was kind of interesting.
Was that after the strike?
The second strike.
This was in the 70s. Then.
Yeah. Well, they were talked, must have been about
74?
74 when they were going to go on strike again because they were not getting what they wanted, and they planned on going on strike. Well, we voted, we'll wait for the decision, but in the meantime, they had already said that they'd come around to that. And then when Beckstead was president, we held a special meeting out over
Key Lanes.
Key Lanes.
Key Lanes, we had,
And
that's where our
they
union
voted
was.
then to table it and take and wait for what would happen.
I remember the news media was waiting outside. We had about 160 people, I think, at that meeting
Yeah.
at Key Lanes, and it was above the bowling alley. It was hard to even have the meeting because they were bowling downstairs,
Yeah.
so it was kind of hard to hear. But the news media was all waiting for us out in the parking lot when we came out.
I was just saying that they interviewed him.
Yeah,
Well, when there was, in the mid-'80s, there had been no talk of any strike. But the news media kept, locally and nationally, we kept saying, oh, well, the carriers, postal workers are going to walk out. Well, Channel 33 had me on their 11 o'clock news live, and interviewed me and asked me whether there would be mail service tomorrow morning in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I said, absolutely. I said, I have not heard any information on national level or any level at the union that we're contemplating going on strike. And I said, I don't know where you're getting your information because it's not valid, you know. Those are the things, and it's very interesting that happened back there. There were some members in our group that probably would have gone out on strike if the local would have decided to do that, but we never did decide to do that. We were conservative, I would say.
How many attended that meeting? Johnny, were you there?
Yes, that was probably the largest
Very
union
large.
meeting in
Yeah.
our history.
Yeah.
I remember when I hired in 1964, Al Smith was the postmaster. And he had me in his private office, and I had to take an oath that I will not strike. I had to swear it on the Bible.
Oh, wow.
And that's exactly what I did. So I think that deterred a lot of people from walking out
Yeah.
because of that oath.
And of course, everybody knew that the local presidents, if any of your people walked out, you'd been put in jail.
the leaders of the union would
The
be in jail.
leaders would be,
Yeah,
would
everyone.
they put the strikers in jail too, or just the leaders?
Well, the leaders be number one
For sure.
first shot people they would put in jail.
Wow.
Because they'd want to make an example of the leaders, and they figure that if the rest of the membership saw the leadership being put in jail,
Then
then
they
they
would
would,
strike.
they would not walk out.
Yeah.
Right.
It was an
Wow.
intimidating factor, yeah.
74, the air controllers that went on strike.
No, that was in the 80s.
That was in the
That was the
Huh?
80s.
That was in the
Yeah,
80s when
that was when Ronald Reagan
was president.
That was when I was local president.
If they had been, if their officers had been honest and done what they should have, they would never went on strike. Because after they voted to go on strike, we were having a contract, and ours was coming up, and they didn't want to take us on because they knew we'd win. So they in turn fired all the air controllers that crossed the picket line. Well, what happened was these people voted to go on strike, but yet they wanted, when time to come to go on strike, they crossed the picket line. So you could say they had 60% voted strike, and then when they went on strike, only about 30% of them honored that strike. So that meant another 20 to 30% crossed the picket line. Well, they didn't have a grounds to stay on, so they just had to fire them.
Well, Ronald Reagan, the way I recall the situation, told the Postmaster General that he needed to get in the room and come to an agreement with the postal workers because there was no way he could replace almost 900,000 employees, but he could take care of the air traffic controllers. And so that's how we actually got a contract that particular year, was because the air traffic controllers walked out and he fired them. And
Just too bad.
I say to this day that I feel that was the turning point for organized labor. And since that point, organized labor struggles have been challenged a lot harder and
Yeah.
stronger.
Yeah.
The social contract with the workers was broken
Right.
at that time.
Yeah, and so, you know, it's sad because, you know, as organized labor leaders and stuff, we try to hang together as much as possible, but there's so many times, and specifically that time, because the air traffic controllers are government workers too. You know. And so, but one thing I will say about the NELC, they have the best organization as far as recruiting members in their union because it's totally voluntary. We have the best record, and I guess that there's a plaque up on the Union Hall wall up there that I was presented at the National Convention in Portland, Oregon. For the previous 2 years, we showed the greatest improvement of getting new members based upon our category of membership of any local in
I
the nation.
just saw that
Yes.
last Monday when I was up there.
That is one of the one plaque that I'm very proud and
Should be.
honored
That's great.
Should be.
that I had a small part to play. There was an article back in 1989 where myself, Tom Green, and Jim Michelle were interviewed, and it was in the National Activist in 1989, talking about our organizing efforts. And we really had an inside track because Jim Michelle was one of the trainers at that time. And at that time, we used to be able to go in and employ orientation and make a pitch for the union and encourage people to join the union and try to give them the reason why. And I guess, you know, we look back now, whenever we had to get our increases through Congress, we relied heavily upon what was then the Ladies Auxiliary to write the letters because we really couldn't write the letters, even to our congressman back then, because of the Hatch Act.
That's right.
And so, not until the 90s was the Hatch Act modified, and in all my advocacy work with Senator Quayle, Senator Lugar, and then Representative Dan Coates, whenever you contact them, they always were saying, well, it's for your protection. We can't change that law. We need to keep that because otherwise they'll take advantage of you and all that. And because they were under the impression we were asking for repeal, and I had to keep stressing the point, it wasn't repeal, it was some modification where federal employees could participate in partisan political activities
Right.
off duty.
Right.
We weren't asking to be able to wear political badges or buttons or anything like that. In fact, Jerry probably remembers this too, that if you had a political bumper sticker on your car, you were in trouble because that was a violation of the Hatch Act.
You couldn't be affiliated with any kind of a union, as far as they was concerned. And they had the Hatch Act. And that was a big club over our head. You couldn't participate in a lot of political rallies. You couldn't take them to part. In fact, I was 4th District President, and they put a gag rule out. We had a district meeting in Anderson, and the gag rule was I was not supposed to have a senator there, congressman there. Well, I went up against the rule and I contacted one, and he later called me and he says, "You sure you want to risk this?" I said, "I'll take a chance, let's go." So we had the meeting and he showed up, but just before we had the meeting, they rescinded the order on the gag rule. But at one time, you couldn't, they put a notice out. You couldn't contact your congressmen and senators and all that.
Not even on your private time.
No,
But
So that's why we rely so heavily on the auxiliary to do the lobbying for us and retirees.
Right.
The only way we got a pay raise, you would have to contact your congressmen and senators. And they would take and start in April. And you would take and go to Washington DC, delegation. And you would take and visit both the congressmen and the senators you'd take and leave here on a Saturday afternoon after we got off work and drive all night, get to Washington DC early Sunday morning, check into a motel. We get $50 for 4 days, and you take 2 or 3 guys in a room, and then on Tuesday we turn in our reports and drive back because we had to be to work Wednesday morning. And amazingly, we only got $50 for the time that we left. That included meals, hotel, and transportation.
Wow. So that was collective begging. All you could do was go and beg.
The branch would elect 4 delegates to go. And there's anytime we went down there we'd leave here Saturday and get back on Wednesday. And I've had to sit in several congressmen's offices. E. Russ Adair, Hartsky, Roush. In fact, when Roush was running for senator or congressman, United Labor was backing him, and they wouldn't allow us to have any political, but we snuck him into our parade to float, and we were in turn that year. From then on, United Labor was banned from the Three Rivers Festival because we had supported Ed Rouse for the parade.
Well, let's move ahead a little. After the strike, the post office and actually President Nixon finally caved and gave in and created the Postal Reorganization Act, which was probably the biggest thing to happen for us as a union. It not only forced the post office to give us pay raises, quite a few, but also our first collective bargaining with binding arbitration was established. So after that, we were actually able, not me, but the NLC, was able to bargain a contract, negotiate a contract. And I'm sure, just thinking about what that would have been like, would have changed everything. Not that everything was perfect after that, but in what ways after 1970, with the contract established, with pay raises, and the Postal Service actually established, how did that change things?
Very slowly. It was, it's just like any time you try to change something that's been in effect for a long time, change comes very slow. And I can remember back whenever I first started going to union meetings, that at our union meeting, President Rademacher always sent us a cassette tape with a monthly message. And we always played that at our meeting. And he was giving you the information that you needed to do your duties as a local union officer. And the position of the national. That's how we communicate back then, basically, other than the letters or regular mail. So.
Okay. The first contract was, I think, 1971. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Sounds right.
And of course, there was no step B. How did that work? I don't know how involved you were then, Robbie, but
Well, the grievance procedure at that time, they consisted that it was step 1, step 2, step 3, which step 1 was between the steward and the supervisor, and step 2 was between generally the union president and a manager. I don't think you didn't have to meet with Eugene Gabriel, did you, as the postmaster?
Well,
I did.
Jerry,
Did you?
and they
Okay.
did it first, yeah.
So-
Step two was.
Step 2 was
postmaster
with
for
the
a while.
postmaster. Step 3 then would become the property of the union would appeal the grievance to the regional level in Chicago, Bloomingdale, Illinois, and then our national business agent's office would handle the grievance at that point. And then there would be a binding arbitration. Of course, there was a lot of interpretive steps at the beginning of the contract because it was all new to everybody. So there was also what they called Step 4, which went to the national party. And they would sit down and they would specify what their intent was of the language of the contract. And they would specify their intent, then they would send the grievance back to the people at Step 3 to resolve it based on the mutual understanding, which all that has changed now. They put that mutual understanding in the book that we call the JCAM, and they update that every year. That mutual understanding is now put out there for us to look at every day on the workroom floor. So, but to begin with, all those went to had to go to the headquarters level, and they would sit down, and that's where a lot of our Step 4 agreements come from. And there's thousands, there's over 1,000 of those. But a lot of them, you'll look at those dates from 72 and 78, and that's when the foundations of our current contract were actually being worked out at the national level.
What I'd like to share is the first day I was union steward at Hazelwood Station. I had to represent 3 employees against Dick Bloom and Eugene Gabriel. The 3 employees were Craig Wilcuts, Joe Culver, and John Kugler. And it was all over due to the length of their hair. And so at that time I had fairly long hair as well. And whenever I showed up along with the other 3 carriers, Mr. Gabriel asked me, he says, well, what are you doing here? I didn't request you be here. I said, I'm the union steward, sir. So I'm here to represent them and hear what's going on in this meeting. And of course, the carriers were given a direct order to cut their hair. One thing that the postmaster didn't realize that John Cougar spent $40 a week to have his hair washed in the sack. So now I can't say too much about Joe, but Craig Wilcuts, and then after the meeting they said, well, what are we going to do? They give us a direct order to get a haircut. I said, that's true. I said, I want you to go get a haircut. I said, you didn't say how much you had to have cut off. I don't care if it's the 32nd of an inch. Get a haircut. And I want a receipt. And Jerry was president at that time, and we won that case at Step 3 in their favor because the M41 said generally credible appearance. And so those are some of the fun times you have, but what a way to start as being a steward.
Yeah, over haircuts.
So we had a contract, but then most of the arguments were how to interpret it, right?
Yes.
Well, see, the thing is, it was in the early stages, and management didn't want to relinquish any authority.
Right.
That's an example of it. And I know Jerry and Bob can very easily remember, that it was tough. In fact, whenever I first took over as local president in '82, over a period of time, we were only second to Detroit in the number of arbitrations that was held in Fort Wayne. And due to our stewards doing a very good job preparing cases, we had a good 65 to 70% win. And so I say today, we made management too smart and everything. So they knew how to come at us and beat us later on. But at that early stage, we had the upper hand and everything, and I was very happy that we had such good representation at the national level. we had people such as Ron Brown and Fred Herman that were the regional administrative assistants. And of course, and Jack Seabolt was the national biz agent. And of course, the first national biz agent that I worked under was Henry Rothwell, who's from Raleigh, Indiana. And if I recall correctly, he got elected at the national convention in Hawaii. And so he served in that capacity until I think Jack Seabolt was the one that succeeded him, wasn't he? Jerry, I think. Wasn't Jack the one that?
Gabriel should have learned his lesson on that haircut business.
Yeah. Well, what was really interesting was
Because I had to file a grievance on it for 3 hours. He wanted to regulate how long they could
Right.
have their hair cut.
Yeah.
And I proved to him that he couldn't regulate it.
Sure.
And his argument was, well, if I can't, I'm going to make him can't have it so long. Well, I'm bald. And I says, well, then what about me? And he looked at me and said, what do you mean, what about you? Well, I said, I can't grow hair. I'm bald. Now, what are you going to do to me? Oh! Well, in turn, the National had told him that there wasn't, he had no right to take him to, if you didn't have guidelines to set that down to begin with, you couldn't set them afterwards. So he had to let all three, I had 4 of them. I don't remember their name, but all 4 of them walked out of the office, no charges. Because he was going to fire 2 of them.
For long hair. Well, let's lighten the mood a little, shall we? Enough about grievances. Any funny stories, practical jokes that we all hear about occasionally that we probably couldn't get away with today?
Well, I tell you what, Tim, when I was in the station at Fairfield, I was a swing man. And on Sunday, we would case mail. All the swing men, they didn't go out on the street. They would case the mail. They'd case 5 routes. So I was over there with my buddy at, Dick, what was his name? Smith.
There was a Dick Smith.
Yeah, there was Dick, but it wasn't Dick Smith. What was his name? Anyway, we'd case our. He had a swing and I had a swing, and we were about a half a block from the Paramount Grill. And of course they were open, and I said, "What?" I said, "Mike, that's Mike. Let's sneak out the back door." And we'd walk into the Paramount Grill and have a couple beers, and then come back to the route or the post office, the station, and they never did know anything about it. But I don't think I could get away with doing that now.
Probably not.
And anyway, when I hired in 1964, the supervisors had a little heart. You know, I worked for a guy by the name of Bill Ewing out of Fairfield Station, and the only time he really got perturbed with me was I got back from the route. It was about 1:30 in the afternoon, and this Vance Travis I was his swing man, and he told me, John, you're in such bad shape. I think I can outrun you. I said, okay, I'll tell you what we'll do, Vance. We walked out in front of Packard Park. All the carriers were on Fairfield Avenue, and we had a race around Packard Park. And when I got back, I took him out. That's the only time that my supervisor really was perturbed about that, because it was open to the public. They were cheering. We raced around Packard Park. I'll never forget that.
Did you win?
Yes.
Well, you had longer legs.
Johnny, what about the time when you came to work, because I worked at Fairfield Station, and the first time I met you, I was casing in one aisle, and you were in the aisle over, and I heard this, the Beast of Turkey Lake.
Oh, yeah,
About every 20 minutes, somebody would yell, "The Beast of Turkey Lake," real loud. I wondered, who was that? And that was you.
yeah, that was
Hollering, "The Beast of Turkey."
Earl Oberkaiser was
Yeah.
the Beast of Turkey Lake.
Yeah.
But then there was a time when you were there and your neighbors called and wanted to know if you knew that your car was running, sitting in front of your house.
Well, that was when I was on Violet Court and I was single, and I probably got in about 4:30 in the morning, and I had to go to work at 6. And actually, I shouldn't have went to work. I had a little bit too much to drink the whole day. But anyway, I forgot to shut my car off. Right on Kinsmore Avenue. The car ran for probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, you know. And that, they never let me forget that.
It'll shut itself off eventually.
Yeah.
Well, I guess about the most humorous thing that I can really remember was one time I was out at Hazelwood Station. Mike Lamborn was one of the supervisors out there at the time, and I had Route 572. And at that time, loading was an office function. And so the county clerk was running behind that day. And volume was down a little bit. And so I knew that if I didn't pull my case and go load my vehicle, I was going to have waiting for mail time. So I said, well, I'm just going to pull my case, load my vehicle. About that time, the county clerk will read my case. I'll sign for my county. That's what happened. And Mike Lamborn, he said, "You SOB." Says, "I thought I had you for waiting for mail." And he said, "Here, you went out there and put your case and load your vehicle, and you didn't have any waiting for mail time." So he was very upset. And I guess another funny thing was one time, I always carried my lunch when I had carried 572, and normally ate it on Nevada Avenue. Bill Jones went with me the one year, and he was told that I carried my lunch. Well, I deliberately took a steak sandwich that day. And so got to my location, take my lunch. Bill didn't have anything to eat. He didn't bring anything. And I asked him when he wanted me to take me anywhere. He said, "No." I said, "That's all right." So I ate my steak sandwich and had my lunch, and I carried my route. Well, then a couple of years later, Mike Lamborn went with me on the same route inspection. And he got in the vehicle and he says, "Now, I'm going to tell you something. You're not going to treat me like you did Bill Jones." He says, "Whenever it comes time for you to go to lunch, you're going to take me over to Sambo's over on Coliseum Boulevard so I can get something for lunch, and then we'll come back and eat." And I said, "I will do that under one condition, Mike. I'm still carrying mail, because that is not my normal way." And so he did. I was carrying mail for the time that we went over to Sambo's.
So you can make that a regular part of your route after that.
And I guess one thing I really thought was very helpful whenever I was local president in my later years, I had it set up every Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. I had a meeting with Mike Lamborn on operations that was going on around the city. And I think we help prevent and help improve working conditions by having those people. So those are some of the things that I think that the EI process, and a lot of people didn't like the EI process, but I know Robert, he was involved, he was a facilitator, and I think he could probably tell you I probably milked it for his worth, right?
There's another tool in the toolbox, you told
Right,
me.
yeah.
Share a little bit about what that was.
Well, what it did, it opened it up where employees were actually involved in how the job was done or any changes, and each station could go ahead and make those modifications, and if that, as long as it was agreeable with the management at that station, that's what it would be.
Sat down and tried to work stuff out.
Yeah, and so the thing is, what EI did was allowed me access to management information and documents. And so that's one of the ways that I was able to realize what, and plan for challenging some of the things that they were going to do. And I had the opportunity, whenever they started going to automation, I was local president at that time, and I had a supervisor who would allow me to watch the operation of sorting the mail. And I guess the one thing that I really thought was lousy, bad deal, was when Martin Marietta first brought in the letter sorting machines, it couldn't perform according to the manufacturer's standards. And I was there and witnessed it, and the local postmaster signed off of accepting the equipment, even though it couldn't meet the manufacturer's thing. And it wasn't but 2 years later we replaced that equipment again and paid a lot of money. So those are some of the things that I thought was wasteful. And I still think today the Postal Service has too much management people. Letter carriers will get the mail delivered regardless of whether the supervisor's there, because they know what the job is. And you know, what's really funny is most supervisors believe, even today, that a carrier wants to make his job as tough as they can. Carriers don't do that. That's not their mindset. That's not their attitude. Their attitude is, I want to go out there and give the best service I can for my patrons and get the job done as efficiently as possible. That's it. And that's the way I've always looked at it.
Just be treated respectfully.
Well, yes, and you know, and I can say that, you know, on the local level and the state level and everything, I feel that I have received a lot of respect from different crafts, leaders of different unions and stuff during my time that I was active in the union, and I feel very honored to have received that. But I've always tried to teach my kids that respect isn't automatic. You have to earn it. And that's what I always try to say.
Humorous story that I wasn't involved in it, but two carriers that I worked with, Carl Schock and Arnie Reeder, were the ones that were involved in this. Arnie had a paper route that he delivered every morning before he came to work. Got up 4 o'clock in the morning or earlier to deliver this paper route. And this one day he asked Carl to go with him. It was wintertime, and Carl went with him. Well, they finished their paper route, and they still had an hour before they had to go to work, so they thought, well, they're just going to pull over in the car and take a nap before going to work. But not having an alarm to wake them up, they figured that they'll just leave the car running because it was winter and it was cold. And Arnie would put his feet up by the heater. And when his feet got warm, it would wake him up, and it would probably be time to go to work.
Sounds like a plan.
So Arnie had his feet on the heater, and the engine's running, and Carl's in the back seat sleeping, and Arnie's in the front seat sleeping, and Carl smelled Arnie's shoes starting to burn. And Carl woke up and forgot where he was, and he looked out the front window, and there's a tree right in front of the car, and he thought they were getting ready to hit it because their engine was running, but they weren't even moving. They were just sitting on the side of the road. And Carl yelled, "Stop!" And Arnie sat up and grabbed the wheel and mashed on the brake. And they weren't even moving. But that's working multiple jobs to make ends meet. Is something that
So did they make it to work on time?
Oh yeah, they made it to work on time. But you know, letter carriers, a lot of letter carriers, as Jerry said, work 2 jobs to make ends meet.
So my father-in-law did work security for a usher at the Coliseum for years. Any other funny stories before we do show and tell?
Well, I
can remember one incident. I was going to get letter of discipline. And I had it started to rain on the route. So I put my raincoat on. And at that time, if you had an outer garment on, you had to have a tie on. Well, it was the middle of summertime. And it started to rain. I put my raincoat on. I come back in. I got the raincoat all buttoned up. Supervisor stopped at the back door. He says, open that coat up. I opened it up. You got no tie on. Well, it was raining out there. It started to rain before. He says, you're going to get some discipline for this. And I said, wait a minute. You're going to discipline me because I've not got a tie on? And he says, you better believe it. You know the rules. Well, we argued a little bit, but I ended up getting out of it. But to this day, I still remember the time that I almost got a letter of warning or time off because I didn't have a tie on.
I remember you, Jerry, telling about having to line up for inspection.
Oh, yes.
That was under Al Smith because he was a retired military guy, right? He
Well,
was like colonel or something.
Probably
I guess-
Dreisball, Colonel Dreisball. Was that before your time?
yeah, I carried mail in Milwaukee. And you go to work in the morning, and if you're a swingman, well, you went to the swing room. Well, invariably, the supervisor would say, inspection. So everybody had to fall out and stand at attention, and he would walk up and down and back in front of everybody. And if he didn't pass the inspection, you went back to the swing room, and you got chewed out. Well, and then I transferred to Fort Wayne in '58. Well, I found out that they were having the same inspections. It so happened, Art Gagley, who was our supervisor, he was a sneaky one. He had a second uniform, and he kept it in his locker. So whenever they had to take him to go inspection, he'd run down to the swing room, change his clothes, and come back up and pass the inspection. And he had invariably, he had a scroungy uniform on, but he always passed the inspection because of the way he operated.
That's good.
And there was a long time that we didn't get voting allowance.
Yeah, well, see, we had to pay for our own uniforms. That didn't happen until the mid-'60s. Or later.
Well, if you look at some of the old photos up in the Union Hall of the mail that those letter carriers used to have strapped on themselves and their leather mail pouch, they had parcels and everything else tied onto them. And so I used to kid the modern day letter carrier. I said, you know, we don't have anything to complain about. We didn't have to work under those conditions.
Yeah.
We're fortunate.
Probably a lot of walkout routes.
Well,
I think so.
We took streetcars.
Yeah,
Yeah.
streetcars and buses and stuff, right?
And buses.
it was mandatory that you carry 35 pounds. And there's many a time the supervisor would take you, before you were leaving, take your pouch and go over and weigh it to make sure you were carrying 35
At
pounds.
least 35 pounds?
Oh, yes, you had to have 35 pounds. If you didn't, well, that's the reason why these carriers always had, you'd see them have stuff strapped on, and you got your mail out of relay boxes. Because a partial post driver would bring out the mail and put it in the relay box, and then you would take mark out of that relay box and then come back and get out of it again. So you may operate out of it 2 or 3 times before you went to the next one. It was, see, you had a partial post alarm route too, because the partial post alarm drivers would deliver relays the first thing in the morning, and then they would deliver partial post to the routes in their route. And he may have 5, 6 routes, and he would take and deliver the post on. After he'd go deliver all the partial post, run a collection, and then he would have to come back and go to the annex and pick up his post and go deliver that. And if it got done too soon, there was some of them that had to run a collection that night. There was a couple of the partial post drivers that would take and run collections. And you had special delivery. There was 5 special delivery red messengers, and 1 for the city and daytime. And then there was 2 at night. They would average 125 miles in 1/4 of the city. You had the east one where he had all the industry, and you make 2 or 3 trips on special delivery. You come back, you go out at, you started at 7 o'clock, and at 8 o'clock you were leaving on your first trip, and you had to be back by 11, go to lunch, and that's when the trains was coming in, and they would bring in afternoon delivery. Well, then you would go back out, and on the second trip, and most generally you got done about 2 o'clock on that, and then you come back in, and anything that's left there, you had to go make a delivery. And it was kind of interesting, but it's one of those things that the post office decided they could do without.
Yeah. We want to hear about the Cubs games. When did that start, John?
Well, that goes back with Rob. Rob used to help me, and I remember when I think I had to be in the mid-70s when I started running the Cub game.
Yeah.
And at that time, we went down to Cincinnati, and with the bus and the tickets and the food and everything, I charged them $17.50.
Good deal.
Yeah, it really is. Well, now you can't get by with maybe 60, 65, and then you're really pushing it. But I told Jim Michelle, he helped me, and after last year, I says, I'm just too doggone old to do this. My liver and my doggone knees can't stand it anymore. So that was the last year that we ran trips. But we always had a good time, and the carriers, I think they really enjoyed themselves.
We'd get together the night before, we'd make up sandwiches for the whole busload. We made the sandwiches at your house.
Yep.
And in the morning, we'd pick up donuts so that everybody had donuts before they got on the bus. They had sandwiches on the bus. They had all the beer they could drink all the way there and all the way back when you weren't standing in the barrel.
Yeah, oh, jeez.
Standing in the barrel.
I'll never forget on one of those bus trips, Jeff Jacobs, he went on one of our trips, and he was completely loaded, and he was in the barrel,
Standing in the ice
throwing
water.
water over time, and ice and everything. I said, God, Jeff, I said, I'll never forget one time Jimmy and I got back, and the bus company called up.
Yeah.
The bus company said, you realize that was the filthiest bus that we've ever had to clean on a Monday morning. Said, we're going to charge you an extra $50. And Jimmy looked at him dead serious. Well, nobody threw up on there, did they? Unbelievable. But we used to run horse race trips too, Rob, didn't we?
Yeah, down to Cincinnati and to
Arlington. We went
Yeah.
there. That was a beautiful, beautiful time.
The bus driver got lost leaving the horse track in Cincinnati. We ended up driving into Kentucky.
I'll never forget
He got 2 speeding tickets on the way down
Yeah, I
there.
had this bus driver, and he was so proud. He says, you know, I've had 1,000,000 miles of no accidents and no citations.
Whoops.
And we didn't get to Decatur. He gets a ticket.
Just right after we crossed into Ohio. we got
Yes,
the first
and
ticket.
then coming back, he gets another ticket. I said, you
No, it was
know,
before we got there. He
Yeah.
got the second ticket just outside of Cincinnati because he was trying to make up time from the first ticket that he got.
he said, you know, you guys are in jakes.
Used to take and pick a number, make a top mark on the tire, and then they take it.
When
They
they
started
stop.
a pool, and wherever that mark stopped at, was the winner of the pool, because they put a mark on the fender, and whoever was closest to it got the winner of the pool.
They put numbers around the tire.
Oh, that was on the bus trips?
On the bus trip, the tire would have numbers all the way around it, and there would be a mark on the fender. And when you got off, whatever number was lined up with the tire won the pool.
Sounds like fun. Well, Becky, I told you I was going to put you on the hot seat. You are our first female president. And I just wanted to know if you'd like to share a little about kind of a male-dominated world, what that was like being a
Well,
lady
by the
president.
time I became president, we had so many women letter carriers. When I started in '85, we were still kind of a novelty, but growing strong. And I don't know what the percentage is now. Do you, Robbie?
No.
I think we're not even, but we're really, catching up. So, becoming president, I did not see it as a male-dominated. There are a lot more males than females in active offices, but I think I was so thrilled to be the first woman president. In fact, I was afraid I was going to cry during my speech because it thrilled me so much to not only be president, but to be the first woman president, and hopefully opening the doors for everybody else here locally. But I think being a woman, hopefully I have the leadership qualities that it takes, but also bringing in the woman aspect of kind of different methods of organizing and leading people, because I come from a different perspective. And I always say I should be getting combat pay because I was a mother of 3, but it gives you so many different experiences, and not that the men didn't have the fathership thing, but I just incorporate that. And if you could see me before, I was here cleaning our new hall, and just I think it brings I can tap more things within myself, being a woman, being a mother, being a leader, and hopefully it will show in my leadership, and hopefully I have been doing a good job and continue to do that.
Kind of the branch mom.
I am, and some of you guys need moms. So,
You're doing a great job.
I knew that when I started in 1969, there was only one female letter carrier in Fort Wayne. So that has changed significantly.
and there's so many branch presidents that are women. I see at the president's meeting, and I remember when I first started going to the conventions. I was like in '95, even then. We always got a kick out of it because the men's line for the restroom would always be really long, and us women could be in and out, which was totally different in any other aspect of life, But just things like this, and now you see so many women at the conventions and so many leaders, and I think it's great, and we just bring a different view on everything, and.
Becky, wasn't Jane Browndell the first female that is a national officer?
Yes, she was, and now there's 3.
Yeah,
Three.
Nicole Ryan and Myra Warren.
Myra Warren was there.
And can I ask Becky, you're a president of the NELC. Have you ever felt that the union has ever discriminated against you for being a female?
Absolutely not. I never, ever felt that way. For locally, I've only got encouragement, and I rely so much on these people sitting at the table, especially this man who I feel put me where I am today because he saw something in me that I never saw. And he says, "Hey, you want to be steward?" And I go, "I don't know." I was handed an empty briefcase from Perga, and I know he had to come behind me and cleaned up a lot of messes, but always gave me the support, got me on the state board, and Jerry has been, I mean, he's always there. He does things before I ever ask him, and I rely heavily on Robbie, well, because of his knowledge. I think Bobby calls you a walking encyclopedia, but just, you know, he knows the books. And I rely on everybody to, because leadership is not one person. And it's not really leading, it's just have everybody around you, and we're just kind of all walking together. And, you know, hopefully in the right path.
Al was probably working the D station when the first woman was hired.
No, there were two women that were PTFs whenever I was hired in '67, and they lasted about 25 days.
One of them
67?
Yeah.
was a good-looking young lady, and she was a summer help. And all the guys, because she was the first woman that had been around there, boy, they just fell all over. They cased her route, they did everything for her, and then they stopped for breakfast. And that was a no-no at the time. And when the next day, why, they helped her again. They stopped for breakfast. And she got interviewed by the news media. She saw this, the best job I ever had, the easiest thing I ever did. And she says, we stopped for breakfast, and she blew the whistle on them. Well, in turn, the supervisor got real huffy and mad because they stopped for breakfast. And he knew they were doing it, but it was a no-no at that time. So the next day, she come in, and he laid the law down. You will case your own route, and you get out on the street on time. Well, it so happened they didn't help her this time because they got in trouble. All of them got in trouble, about 4 or 5 carriers. She didn't get out of the station till almost 11 o'clock. Didn't get back till about 5 o'clock.
And that's when you started at 6, right?
And she was complaining about what the supervisor told her, says, you brought it on yourself. He says, you shouldn't have blew the whistle on the guys because now they got to suffer. And he was real strict on them for about 2 months. Well, in turn, she didn't last 2 days. That might have been one of the 25 days. Because she didn't, after that, but nobody'd help her. She was on her own. She invariably wouldn't get out of the office till 11 o'clock.
You know, I need to say that women like Mrs. Lehman, the auxiliary, they were our first leaders, women leaders, because they're the ones that did a lot of behind the scenes and never got any of the credit. And so those were our first women leaders.
You see, the auxiliary at one time was our mouthpiece.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't go and complain to our congressmen and senators. Well, the auxiliary was very active at that time. They had a lot of members. And they, in turn, would do the groundwork and take and do a lot of things that we, as letter carriers, couldn't do. And they would stand out in front of and contact our congressmen and senators and voice their opinion. And in turn, the auxiliary was very strong. And it's sad that we've let them down and we don't have the strength from them. We would have a Christmas party, and the union would furnish the meat, but all the side dishes was furnished by the auxiliary, the members. The wives would take and bring, and we would take and have and the kids at the Christmas party would get an apple, an orange, and a candy cane. That's all we could afford. But it was kind of interesting. And you would have 200 people we would con a church or somebody into letting us use their hall for a Christmas party.
But it took a lot of courage for those women to do what they did.
Becky, I think the first woman letter carrier that I recall, his name was Roberta Clemmer.
Oh.
Do you remember?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the first one I can remember, Rob.
She was still carrying mail just a few years ago down in Carmel, Indiana.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't realize she'd been at the post office.
You had two other ones. You had Judy Krespick.
Yeah, and she's still carrying. I talked to her yesterday, and she's talking about retirement when she.
There was another Judy.
Well, and Bonnie Manning also. Bonnie Tolby was she hired in.
Yeah.
She was a Catholic school teacher, and she came to work at the post office because she could make more money.
Who is that?
Bonnie Tolby,
Oh, yeah.
because she could make more money carrying mail than she could as a school teacher.
What surprises me, though, we have a lot of school teachers, and we have a lot of letter carriers with degrees of all kinds and masters, and that are carrying mail. It started in the 70s and 80s because it did pay so well,
And it was job security.
and it was very good job security.
Disability.
Why don't we show some of your things, the ones you feel like showing. We brought some artifacts here from the past. Yeah, we kind of gotta do it briefly. Does anybody have a couple things they want to show from some of your delegate pins?
That's a safe driver pin. If you didn't have any accidents, they would award you a pin,
Yeah.
and you got a little card with it.
Yep. Got a bunch of them.
I had, it went a good many years without getting an accident, and then I had a couple.
Did you?
And these are my delegate badges, part of them. There's some more in there.
What's your oldest delegate badge, Jerry?
I've got one here. The 100th year we went to Milwaukee, Wisconsin for the special one. And
That's what this one is, isn't it? Milwaukee, the 100th year?
Yeah. Yeah, this here is one of the, I got a postcard as the first date issue, August 30th, 1989. And this here program is about the play that they put on in the theater in Milwaukee in one evening. And most of the people that were in Milwaukee for the celebration went to that. And in fact, Gene and I, we have a VHS tape of that play at the house. And along with that, here's the Centennial coloring book that they had for 1989. And of course, I'm wearing one of the vests that Indiana, the Kim region, wore in the parade when we walked to Plankton Square for the sculpture that was completed and still there in Milwaukee today. And this here is a book about the Centennial Celebration, and it lists all the different presidents in the years that they served. In fact, we can be very proud that the longest serving president was from Muncie, Indiana, and he was President Gaynor. And so
That's right.
he served from 1914 to 1941.
Wow.
So those are the things. And one other thing, if I have time, this is a picture of whenever the Indiana State Association of Letter Carriers celebrated their 100th anniversary. And in this picture, Robbie remembered Tony Martinez, and trying to remember who's next to him. Do you remember who's next to him?
No, I didn't recognize him.
And then Bob Cunningham is here, and he was a state president and also a local president. He was director of education for a good many years.
Yeah.
And next to him is a former national president, Joe Baca. And Next to him is Emery Rothrock, which is the NDA that I mentioned that I first worked for. And then next to him was the current NDA, Ron Brown. And then the next person, I don't know who he is, but
I think that's you.
Herb Lambert is there, and Jim Korolowitz, he was the current regional administrative assistant at that time. And then Ernest Haynes, he was the former president, but we included him because he had been president for several years prior to me becoming president. So,
Very good.
One of the traditions of our branch that has been going on for several years is we do a toast at the conventions that the branch gets together, and it's a camaraderie that we do a toast with Jägermeister, which is a liqueur, and one of the toasts that we did was at that convention that Al just showed you the picture, and Joe Vaca, who was a national president, joined us in our branch and in that toast. So he's an honorary member of our branch. So we toasted Jägermeister with the national president.
Nice. Bob, what do you got there?
These used to be on the shirt. And when they first came, there was on the left shirt.
See, I don't know how, if you can zoom in.
One of them is backwards, so they had to remake them.
That must be before 1970.
And of course, they laughed at us because their horse was going backwards instead of forward.
You got one there too, John. And that was before 1970?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
That was the post office department. We became the U.S. Postal Service after the strike in 1970. So those were badges from the postal department, which used to be a cabinet position with the president.
What do you think, John?
Well, I tell you what, this is probably, the new carriers probably never seen these, but that's a leather bag. And that's what we used. We didn't have cloth bags, we used leather.
Right.
And they figured it was too expensive to furnish these leather bags, and then they did away with them. And right there is, Al, can you pick up, is one of the few people,
Want to try it on?
well, they get, that's my Russian hat, and when we hired, we were issued a badge. And they don't do that now. I thought, well, I'm going to save my badge, and that's really a keepsake for me. And that's those two things are that's what I think about the most.
Great. Well, we're going to wrap it up. I just want to quickly have you share as we go down, and those that are retired, what do you miss the most about being a letter carrier? What do you miss the least? And what advice would you give to our newer carriers? Al, you want to start?
well, I guess the thing that I miss the most is I miss the nice people that I got to meet and serve during my years of being a letter carrier. And I guess the least thing that I don't miss is supervisors.
Any advice for?
Well, my advice is that remember, we're all in the boat together, and we need to row this same direction. And we may not always agree on how we should accomplish a goal or meet a challenge, but we should say we're all letter carriers, we're in this thing together, and stick together.
Great. John?
Well, I miss the camaraderie with my coworkers, and when we were hired, we didn't make a lot of money, but we sure had a lot of fun. That's one thing I really remember.
What do you miss the least?
Some of these abusive supervisors, right? I don't think I could work with the conditions that you guys are under right now, because when we worked, our supervisors, for the majority, they treated us with some respect, and they treated us as a human being, and they weren't just a number. We were treated like people, and but the new regime, I don't know if I can handle it anymore. You know.
Any advice?
Well, I tell you right, the letter carriers, since when we found out that when we could start negotiating a contract, we really made some good money. We're making good money. I think it's a good job. And what you got to do is you got to have some respect. And they don't. I know when I first got here, all they wanted you to do is show up. You know, they don't say if it started, you're supposed to be at 6 o'clock. You're going to be at 6, not 6:20 or 6:15. And when I was carrying mail, if you showed up on time, they didn't bother you. Yeah. And I don't know, Rob, when we were hired, I don't recall pivoting a whole lot. Did you?
No, but then they used to inspect our routes every year, Johnny.
Yeah.
And the routes were adjusted every year to be 8 hours. And but they've taken a lot of work away from us that we used to do. The mail that was forwarded, we used to handwrite the address on the front of the letter. And if you did that every day on every piece of mail that was forwarded, you remembered what mail was good and what mail wasn't good, because you hand wrote it every day when you forwarded the piece. They took that work away from us and gave that to the clerks, and that was the first that I saw that people were not being made regular, because when they took that work away, they added to the routes and made the routes bigger, and then there was too many people for the number of routes, and it took forever to make regular. And it's just been a continuing change since that time with the DPS and with the flat sorter and losing the parcel post when they didn't make it important. And United Parcel came in and took that work away. It's been a continuing erosion of the duties that we did as letter carriers that has made it that has shrunk the workforce, and it's made it harder and harder for people to make regular. That years and years have gone by before they made regular. But it started with. Well, I guess it actually started before that, when they went from 2 deliveries down to 1 per day.
Yeah.
That affected the number of routes that we had, and then taking away the forwarding of the mail, and it's just been a continuing erosion of what we did as letter carriers.
Bob, how about you? What do you miss the most?
Oh, like John says, the camaraderie. It isn't the same as in the factory. One thing about when it's government, they had their budget set. So as long as you didn't take overtime, they didn't care as long as you didn't break the law. I mean, you could do anything. And I know there was a radio program on years ago where they'd hide something out in the park or something, and you gave you clues as where it was. What mail was like, you wait for dispatch. Our guys would run out to Foster Park, look for the gift or whatever was out there. Wasn't ever found. But they didn't care as long as you didn't have a wreck or something while you were gone. As long as you delivered the mail and you didn't bother them, they wouldn't bother you 90% of the time.
Yeah.
So, but then when we wanted overtime for every 2 minutes, they reacted by saying, "You're going to have to show all the time, everything, every minute. You're going to have to count for it." And the guys, of course, we have more grievances than any other business in the world. And then with computers, mail's dropping. We aren't in a position, I don't think, to really be telling people what we're going to do beyond a certain point. After buggy whips, we quit making them after they invented automobiles, so you got to watch what you. I'm worried about the future.
Yeah. What do you miss the least?
Oh, I don't know, I suppose the weather.
That's insane. Out at 20 below.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for newer carriers?
No, I don't know what I'd tell him.
Okay.
May not have a job next week.
Thanks, Bob. Jerry?
Well, as I miss my customers,
Yeah.
because you got to know your people, and it was, they were friendly, and they took care of you, you took care of them. But one of the things that when I started to become a supervisor, you had to be a carrier. And today, the supervisors, a lot of them have never carried a route. They don't know what the efforts and everything that a carrier goes through out there on a route. The weather, I mean, it's altogether different than what, and they just don't have no comprehend what the carrier goes through on a daily basis. I mean, he comes across a lot of problems that not even mentioned. You got dogs out there. You got threats of everything else. I carried mail, and I had to be treated 9 times for dog bites. I mean, of course, I got bit more than that, but it was something different. Like I said, the supervisors, they had some compassion because they had carried mail, and they knew what the hell you were going through. And it was an interesting thing.
What do you miss the least then? About your job?
I guess the attitude of some of our supervisors not taking, they don't have any compassion. It's all from hooray for me, and the only thing that they're looking at is time clock. And as far as it goes, I don't think I could work under the conditions that you guys, the carriers are having to put up with.
Any advice for the newer guys, gals?
Just join the union.
Amen.
I mean,
Good.
as a union officer, and I've probably signed up more people in our branch. Anytime I'd see somebody wasn't a member, he had me on his back to become a member. And
Sign me up.
Sign you up.
like I said, it was. I started out collecting 50 cents a payday in the union. It was kind of interesting, and being working with it, I enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks. Well, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it. Becky, you want to say something else? I can tell. Do you want to say anything as we finish up?
No, I just really appreciate everybody at this table, and I think the local needs a good foundation before it can grow, and these people here have laid that foundation for us to keep going, even though things change every day. We'll just keep trucking on, and we're going to make it.
Yeah.
We'll make it.
I want to thank you, everybody here too, for all your years of service and laying that foundation. And that's why we're doing this. So 50 years from now, we can look back at these stories and see where we started. Not where we started, but as far back as we could go.
Years somebody else will be looking at this.
But I want to thank you again. Appreciate everything you guys have done and are still doing. So that wraps it up. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Very good.